Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's webinar. I am Michelle Childs. I am the Chief of Staff for COABE, and I would like to present to you first Keith Thode from Work Ready Mobile. They are the sponsor for this webinar, and that's why we are able to participate today. So Keith, would you like to share a little something?
Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. And we'll be quick because I know we've got an action-packed session today. Some of you know about Work Ready Mobile, but Work Ready Mobile is your own mobile app and platform for adult education. We developed it specifically for adult basic ed, adult education, and literacy programs. We started with it here in the Dallas area with the Dallas County Community College District, now Dallas College, and now we have programs all across the country using Work Ready Mobile to help retain their students, help them achieve their goals, and to capture the impact for your programs and your reporting. Work Ready becomes your home base for your students for anything you're asking them to do in their program, particularly those things to do online. Instead of having the students remember all these different resources, you can just send them to the app and it's your version with your color scheme, your messaging, and your resources. Again, helps retain the students, helps them achieve their goals, stick with the program, and then capture all the impact that you need both to show others all of your achievements and for your reimbursements and related items. It has a private communication hub, so students can communicate with teachers, teachers with students, navigators, counselors, as well as the administration. Now there's never any reason to message students on free software or text students directly for everybody's protection and benefit. And again, as students have their classes loaded, their other appointments, online appointment scheduling with teachers and reminders there, and then personal goal setting all can happen through the app, and then individualized automated reminders and such to help folks stick with whether it's showing up to class and getting a link right before their Zoom class, reminding them to show up, or that their personal goal of sitting for their GED or other high school equivalency can all be provided through the Work Ready Mobile. So it's really for everybody's benefit. We're really trying to increase student retention and impact, also help the teachers spend less time on administration and more time kind of in direct service to their students. And of course, getting you all the the data that you need for reimbursements and to measure your impact and to show to learn how you all can do better. Um, the other thing one of the other things we do at AdvancedNet is that we have a virtual conference offering that we've been quite busy with. We're about to do our second year of LabKey, Louisiana, and we do several other adult ed conferences. All of our work is in the Tech for Good space, and most of that is in adult education. So if you need any help with that, definitely let us know about that as well. This is a good season for us on the Work Ready Mobile side. We still have a few grants available, technology awards, so you can connect with us at any time about that. And we can underwrite some use of the app and configuration and setup for a while. So with that, I really want to make sure you have as much time as possible with the team. So I will turn it over to Anson and Judy. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much from a fellow Texan there. Great to hear from Work Ready Mobile. And I want to thank everybody for joining today. Anson Green here, and I'm get the slideshow set up for us today. I wanted to remind everybody while you're getting situated, we got a lot going on this webinar today. It's going to go pretty quickly, so I hope you had some coffee after your lunch if you've had lunch. But I wanted to remind everybody too, put your questions in the Q&A. We have a chat in the Q&A. The chat's good for chatting. The Q&A is good for your questions, and that'll help us organize and get responses back to you. So I want to just welcome you today. We're going to go through some exciting stuff related to measurable skills gains. Judy Mortrube, a colleague of mine, coming to us from World Education, and I want to turn it over to her, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to outline the rest of the presentation today. Judy.
Thanks, Anson. Hello, everybody. Yes, indeed. Hold on to your hats. You're in an Anson Green presentation, and we are going to move quickly into the deep end. So we just want to flag for you that this presentation is really designed for people who are quite familiar with WIOA Title II, AFLA, the Adult Education Family Literacy Act Performance Accountability System. Also to note, obviously, we are not the policymakers in your state, so we aren't going to be able to provide guidance on how these NRS changes will play out for you locally, but we do hope to arm you with a lot of information and keep supporting discussions on how we can best use these newly available measures to support adult career pathways and workforce adult education and literacy. And we'll share some methods that we've seen for documenting these gains, and also share some sketches of IET and workforce ed models that we believe could be usable in many different contexts.
Great. Thank you, Judy. We wanted to kind of begin by giving you a little context about where we're coming from. And here you got a little brief resume from me, but the main theme I wanted you to walk away from is I've been working in adult education for many years, almost exclusively in a context of work and work-related progress from a teacher all the way up to now a national administrator at Tyson Foods. And that means that I've been trying to measure student success in workforce programs for many years and really have been eager to get out of kind of standard academic assessments and get into some real life contextualized type assessments and certifications. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You might be wondering why Tyson Foods. Well, we run a huge adult education program in partnership with people like you, our AFLA funded community across the US. So this is something we do, we implement it, and we are doing workplace programs at our factories and our plants, and always looking for new answers in terms of contextualized assessment and really showing student performance as it's actually being performed. Judy, where are you coming from on this thing?
That's the view out my window. I'm in Minnesota right now.
Beautiful.
And I've been in adult ed, I think longer than you, Anson, but really the last 20 years for me has been all about adult career pathway advocacy and program design and implementation. And the shared accountability that WIOA offered us was very exciting because it could allow career pathway partners to truly partner. And these what seem like small but are really quite significant changes in the national reporting system should really make it easier to co-enroll and truly partner with our WIOA Title I youth and adult partners and with employers to provide these comprehensive human-centered services, right, to support adults in building foundational skills and more.
All right, sounds exciting. I want to let everybody too know that employers are very involved, not just Tyson Foods. COABE has been working with me and some others to implement a group of employers. This is just a group of them here that we're working together as far as collaborating with adult education providers like yourself. So employers are really invested in this. The measures we're going to talk about today are very much focused on a workplace and employer-centric type of measurement. And so there's a lot of businesses out there wanting to partner with folks like you. And COABE's been a real champ in helping us align with those businesses and creating our initiative Behind Every Employer. Check out the website there and definitely see what we're doing out there with employers. So let's talk a little bit about some caveats before we begin. First off, Judy and I are not the experts of everything on this topic. We are bringing you our own perspectives. And so the presentation is advisory. We want to bring this to you and to state directors and state offices and to others as our really well-informed take on these new measurable skills gains. At the end of the day, though, providers, teachers need to follow their state guidance, and that state guidance is rolling out as we speak in terms of permissibility, how you would document these skill gains, etc. The other thing I'd like to say is this is a different world in terms of performance measurement than many adult educators are used to. We've been doing pre-post testing almost exclusively for many, many years. And that's pretty easy to do actually, because it's easy to administer, document, monitor. You don't have to make a lot of critical decision making. When we get into these measurable skills gains that we're going to talk about today, the new ones that are being introduced into the NRS, they're new to the NRS, they require quite a bit more decision making at the state levels and the local levels. And that's what Judy and I want to kind of start to broach the discussion with and bring ideas out from our informed perspectives on what states and local areas ought to be considering. These measurable skills gains aren't new to the workforce system, so they're not completely new to everybody. Your workforce boards and other partners have been implementing them. So you've got partners in the community that know their way around these things. But they are less standardized, and we're going to see that when we walk through some examples. We're going to get really practical here in a bit and show you some real life examples of what these measurable skill gain types look like in action. The other thing I would say is it's unlikely the Department of Education, OCTAE, is going to release any more further guidance on what counts, or should you do this, or could you do this. That's really not the role federal governments and even state governments do sometimes. They provide broad overarching guidance. And you'll see today there actually is a lot of published guidance already available. So we want to make that resource available to you. The other thing I would say is on these measurable skills gains, the documentation of them is critical. And we've been implementing those. I live in Texas and I was the state director in Texas. We'd been implementing these for many years. We couldn't count them in the national reporting system, but we implemented them because our providers love them, we love them, and they showed real student performance. But we also stress that these are different ways to document. It's not necessarily a post test, which is easy to document and put in a student's file. So I think that is something where states and local areas need to really bolster their thinking in terms of how would you monitor this. I always ask myself, what would a monitor come look like in a few years from now for that individual student's performance, and say, how did you collect that gain? And then you need to be able to go into a folder and say, here it is right here. That's easy to do with a standardized test. Some of these other ones we'll talk about are more difficult to obtain because they don't come to the school. The school doesn't necessarily administer the exams, and you have to get them. You have to get them from the participant and ask them, did you pass an exam, and bring in the score reports, make a copy of it and put in a file. And we'll talk about that as we dig into these things. Judy, tell us where we can find some more information and where we're getting all our facts from.
Yeah, so here are some of the core documents for WIOA accountability. Obviously, the NRS is how our Title II system, the AFLA system, collects and reports most of our data. But the underlying guidance for what those measures look like, what examples there are for those measures, are in other Department of Labor, Department of Education guidance documents, some joint guidance documents issued between those two agencies that govern the 4 titles under WIOA. And as we go through some of the coming slides, I'll be referring back to this slide, which you will have for reference.
Absolutely. I'll make a note. You'll hear sometimes your workforce partners and others refer to the joint guidance, and that's what's listed there. So the joint guidance is very vague. It actually means some real specific guidance that was jointly developed by the Department of Education and Labor. Good notes there. And we will, everything you're going to see is coming out of this information here in terms of facts related to what we're talking about today on measurable skills gain. You might ask, how did we get here? This is kind of the bill, the legislative and rulemaking process in action. Earlier this year in the fall, the Department of Education made some requests and asked the public, what are some, they proposed some edits that they wanted to make to the national reporting system. And public individuals like me and Judy and others weighed in and said, these are some changes that we would recommend. These are some things that we think would help bolster the strength of the NRS. Department of Education looked at those things, came back with some responses, and ends up in a publication of a revised guidance document. So this is your voice, the public voice, getting involved in making the rules for adult education. So if you ever wondered, how come we do things the way we do them? This is why. And I think this is a great example of how people can come together, like these organizations that submitted responses, and make the case for change in our performance reporting. This is a quick summary of what people were really wanting to get changed in the NRS. And the ones I circled there are the ones related to supporting increased use of measurable skills gain types for IETs and for other types of programs. So you see a real preponderance of interest in those areas. And so that's Department of Ed looked at this and said, you know, the customers of our system, the providers, the state directors and others are on board with this. These make sense. They're really based well in the statute, and some changes were made. So that's how we got here. And I find that real exciting. Judy, before we dive in, remind us about the measurable skills gain description itself, the indicator description.
Sure. So we keep saying MSG, and we'll say that 100 times in this presentation. And this is the definition of MSG. So this is the definition of all of the 5 types of MSG. And the really important part of this definition is, I think, is that word documented. These are documented academic, technical, occupational, other forms of progress, things that people achieve en route to that credential, that recognized post-secondary credential or employment. And
Absolutely.
Now, on the next slide, you're going to see what I think is big news, right? We sort of buried this lead, but the big news is that all 5 MSG types are now available to AFLA on NRS Table 4. Now, that's really in the weeds, but NRS Table 4, if you're in this system, you know that is the table that is used in negotiated performance target setting between the federal agency and your state agency, between the state agency and a local AFLA grantee. So Table 4 is the table that really counts. And we now have included this column on Table 4, which lets you report the number of IET or workplace literacy participants who achieve an MSG other than those traditional MSGs.
Absolutely. And putting my state director hat on from the past, this is an area where the state data systems are having to be modified and changes are having to be made so that you can input these types of new performance measures into your data systems and stuff. So this is a big deal. You guys probably in the local areas don't know this table looking like this. This is what your state's reporting against. So let's dive in and look at what has changed. And I wanted to say I saw some questions coming in. We will be making the PowerPoint available to you after the session. But Judy, let's see what has changed here.
Well, at a high level, it's really just that we now have more ways to demonstrate skill gain in different types of programs with different types of participants. So it's as if adult education now has multiple measures, right? Multiple ways to demonstrate its impact and its effectiveness.
Absolutely. I wanted to say one thing that has not changed. I've been getting a lot of these questions, but even though our post, outcomes can be measured differently, pre-testing is still a requirement for all participants. That hasn't been waived or changed in the national reporting system. So we'll end up in these circumstances where we're going to be pre-testing somebody on a TABE or a CASAS or a BEST Plus test or something, but then the outcome won't be a post-test. It'll be some other type of outcome. So keep that in mind. You'll see that in the examples, and that might be kind of jarring to people because you give a pretest and you kind of have this reflexive feeling to give a post-test, and now we've kind of changed that. We've been in that mode already because we've been able to count high school equivalencies and entry into post-secondary education for the last couple of years, but this is going to just expand those options even more. So Judy, let's look at this and review what we're talking about with the different measurable skills gains and some of the taxonomy we're going to use to describe them.
Sure. So this is one of those pieces of guidance that came out in that the joint Department of Labor, Department of Education guidance that describes the 5 types of measurable skill gains. So you'll hear us using some of this language. Obviously, this numbering structure was not originally in the ed document. It's in that Department of Labor, the Teagle 10-16 change 1 that was on an earlier slide. If you want to dig in there and see some of the examples that we pull will be coming from there. And on the next slide, you're going to see sort of the world that Title II that AFLA lived in, right? This familiar types. 1A, the pre-post test, as Anson was just talking about, probably accounts for 95% of AFLA's MSGs. And it will undoubtedly continue to be the most used MSG because our system has invested a lot of time in it, a lot of resources in it. We understand it, we know how to use it. But we've had these other, the high school diploma, the post-secondary enrollment, we've had these other MSGs available. And now, as of January, we have types 3, 4, and 5. So that's where we're going to spend our time today. And these 3 types, as Anson said, have actually been on the NRS. They've been reported through Table 11 since 2019. For integrated education and training. You can go look at nrs.ed.gov and see how your state has been doing that. Now, some states like Indiana have been knocking it out of the park on Table 11. More than 1,300 people achieved an MSG Type 5 in program year 2019 in Indiana. But again, this is now moving to Table 4, and it is now including not only IET, but also workforce education and literacy, allowable to be reported this year and required next year and beyond. So we're going to spend the rest of our time really imagining the use of these MSGs.
Absolutely. And you might ask yourself, why IET and workplace literacy only? And I was going to refresh us on the reasoning there is found in the definitions of those 2 models. And the thrusts that they have related to work. Here's the definition of integrated education and training. As everyone knows probably on this webinar, it's training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. So the argument that was made in the public comments and really that rests on why expanding to IET is because we need to be able to measure educational, but also career advancement and specific occupational gains. The same is true for workplace adult education and literacy, or workplace literacy, as some people call it. There, the purpose of the program service is to improve the productivity of the workforce. Now, I work at Tyson Food, and when you talk to a plant manager, productivity of the workforce isn't a skill gain on a standardized test or getting high school equivalency. It's increasing production cycles, reducing waste, decreasing safety incidents, etc. So how do you measure those things? Well, that's what some of these new measurable skill gain types will allow us to do, is measure that productivity of the workforce in some authentic methods. Judy, let us hear a little bit more about this important point.
Yeah, so we're just reiterating, right? This is again, NRS Table 4 will now be collecting the measurable skill gain types other than types 1 and 2, and types 3, 4, and 5 can be collected in IETs, as we have been doing on Table 11, but also now for workplace education and literacy. And I do think this is in large part because of Anson's advocacy and his voice now as the voice of the employer, asking for our system to be responsive. So
yeah, it was a team effort for sure. And I would say too, I saw somebody ask about this applying to IELCE participants in the Q&A. I would say yes, if you're providing IELC in combination with an IET, completely applicable. So let's talk about what are these new measurable skills gain types. So we're turning the page here, 30 minutes in, and really going to dive deep into these different types of measurable skills gain. And the first one's very exciting for those of you, especially that work in post-secondary organizations, and this is the transcript or report card. And Judy, tell us a little bit about what this is all about.
Well, it's fairly straightforward, but it obviously requires states or local areas to develop policies, right? Policies that fit your post-secondary academic system. So are you on semesters or trimesters or quarters? Because you've got to establish some baseline for documenting and calculating the credit hours for this measurable skill gain.
Yeah, I would say this one, paying attention to it, every state has unique nuances in post-secondary education design in terms of credits and transcripting and clock hours. And so the guidance, which we're citing here, lists things such as full-time is 12 hours in a semester. Well, if you're in a state with trimesters or quarters, that's going to be different. And the measure gives you the flexibility to kind of design it per your own unique circumstances. When I was state director in Texas, we also did some things such as excluded remedial and developmental education, because those are really not college level types of courses or training courses that lead to a certification. And then we also had our providers document what passing was in their particular states, because passing sometimes might be a 70, it might be a 60 in some circumstances. And so that documentation is critical. So this is one that's very state specific, and state directors will have to work with their post-secondary partners to really define the specificity that a provider would need to be successful in documenting it. So Judy, show us some examples here. This is the stuff I love when we get to see some real models.
Yeah, that again, with the caveat, right? That this is us imagining that a state has issued some guidance, and you have decided to start up an IET program in partnership with the credit side of your community college. And these MSGs, now that we're going to talk about, are interim progress measures en route to the credential. That's one thing I really love about this visual, right? It shows that's the recognized post-secondary credential, which is defined in WIOA and beautifully illustrated in that guidance document from the Department of Labor 2519, the whole menu of different types of recognized post-secondary credentials. And we're talking about the interim progress along the way. So this scenario imagines a learner entering an IET program in partnership with a community college, maybe a credit-based CTE program. And imagine that the individual enters the program in May, right, and continues to August. So as the program director, you are really aiming for an MSG for this participant, right, in both program year 1 and program year 2. But if your IT program is a part-time program, chances are the participant won't have earned enough credits for an MSG type 3 in program year 1, year before the 1st of July. So obviously you'll need a different type of MSG to work there. But if the participant successfully completes those credits, you will have earned MSG type 3, right, for your program, your second program year, again, en route to achievement of that recognized post-secondary credential.
Absolutely. So this is a great example here. A lot of information packed in there. Thank you, Judy. And really wanting to show that, first off, remind everybody, you know, every participant needs a measurable skills gain each program year. So in this example, because it was a part-time load, it wasn't earned in the first part of that first program year. Another type of MSG would need to be earned, and then when the 12 hours or full time was met in the second year, you could pick up this type of measurable skill gain. So take some calculation there, careful management on local provider sides for the MSG type 3. And let's look at type 4. This is the one that gets me very excited because it's very focused on employment. And this is satisfactory or better progress report towards established milestones, such as the completion of on-the-job training or completion of a one-year apprenticeship or similar milestone from an employer or training provider who is providing training. And I'm going to kind of really dive in and parse this apart so we can look at these pieces. I'm going to take this dependent clause out of here for a second and just look at these core components of it and walk through them. So the first thing that's critical here is satisfactory or better progress. So that doesn't necessarily mean a grade of any certain number that's quantifiable. It's more subjective in terms of like what is determined satisfactory or better progress. And it's either meeting or exceeding that type of performance. The other thing very critical here is that it's a report, a progress report documentation. And so we're used to tests and test scores and things like that. What is a progress report? It's not a test necessarily, although maybe a test could be part of that report. But Judy, tell us about reports for a split second here, and what are we talking about?
Well, one of the things I liked about that earlier visual we were looking at, right? You had a clipboard there that said something like transcript, because documentation is super important in any measurable skill gain achievement. And when you're talking about reports, right, you're talking about a way to document the training milestones. So this example that you have on the next slide comes from Massachusetts. Massachusetts as a state invests a lot in workplace education, and correspondingly, they have some very good ways to document progress milestone gains. So you can imagine this type of gain in an IET program where the training provider or the employer has established the milestones, writes them down, documents them, documents the method used to note their achievement. Or again, you could see this same type of progress milestone happening in an adult workplace adult educational literacy program.
Absolutely. So this is something that really is your conversation with the employer and negotiating maybe some very customized performance. So this is where states and local programs have to really dig in and listen to employers, talk to training providers, and come to an agreed upon kind of outcome for this measurable skills gain. So these established milestones, interesting term. I think it's very deliberately chosen. It doesn't say established test scores or something like that. It means it's agreed upon. It's established between the two parties, clearly defining progress, and includes maybe what would be some acceptable documentation of that milestone. So that's what you would be putting in your report. If we dig down deeper in the definition, real important here, the milestone, this agreed upon performance metric, is from the employer or the training provider who's providing the training. So it's very customized to that local service. It's not from a test publisher. It's not derived from a test publisher. It's not coming from a state agency. So there's not going to be a list of the types of milestones that are acceptable. There might be guidance listed on how to document milestones, but this is a very, very contextualized type of performance measure, which makes it very, very appropriate for workplace programs with businesses that are often looking for very contextualized services. If we dig into that dependent clause that we were kind of taking out of the mix for a minute, important that this example language, this flexible language, such as or similar milestones, which means these aren't the only examples. It's not only completion of an OJT or one-year apprenticeship program. These are just some examples of what the Departments of Education and Labor are talking about, but these are very customized. And so you'll see this measure in particular gives quite a bit of flexibility and customization. So let's talk a little bit about the documentation for something, a milestone measure. This is from Memo 17.2, the joint guidance we mentioned earlier. So documentation may vary. So again, flexibility. Read the language very carefully on here and you learn a lot about the options that you have as a state or local program. To identify, so the programs should identify appropriate methodologies based upon the nature of the services being provided. So the measurement is very customized and it's not a one size fits all. There's not going to be a list of these things, as I mentioned earlier, because the service is customized and thus the measure is customized. Real important language, I think, here. The progress report must document substantive skill development. So that term substantive to me says that this needs to be specifically of some sort of magnitude. It's a very specific term in some ways, but it's also a subjective term in some ways. But it means really some meaningful effort it needs to be taken to get there. I think that was put in there to guard against easy gains. We have had discussions, Judy and I and others, about what would count. And I think we've got to be careful. And this is where I would advise states to be really careful to think about, is the measures that you're seeing in your local areas, are they of substance? For example, one I always give is, you know, when you go work in a bar or work in a restaurant, you can go take a 1.5 hour alcohol service certification from your state, for example. That's a certification that could count, but I don't know if 1.5 hours of training and that one certification, which could be delivered in multiple languages, would be deemed substantive. It's a state call, and I think that's one thing that needs to be discussed. The Serve Safe food service is one that's often discussed, but that can be taken in many languages. You can take that in an afternoon in the back of a fast food restaurant. And so does this meet the spirit of substantive? And that's the discussions that states have to have when they're thinking of this measure. Some other language I want to dig into, the progress reports may include, again, flexible language, training reports on milestones completed as the individual masters these required job skills or steps to complete, to completion. So it's this progress across a continuum. And really exciting, I think, here is getting a pay increase because you've learned new skills. The participant has learned new skills can actually be considered the measurable skills gain. a documented pay increase. So that's where you work with your business, and the business says, if this group of individuals can learn these skills, specifically, let's document them here in our report. They'll get a 75-cent pay raise or a $2 pay raise. And documenting, out of the 12 students, 9 of them got the pay raise. That's 9 measurable skill gain awards. How your data system collects that in the state and all of that are things that states have to decide, and local programs have to figure out how would we document that. But lots of flexibility there, taking us completely out of the realm of having to give a test or take some other form of measurement. Let me dive into some examples here and give you some real examples. So this is a program we have in Portland, Indiana, in our Upward Pathways program at Tyson Foods. It's an IET for a role they call operators. They operate the lines in this tortilla factory up there in Portland, Indiana. Here, the progress report example can be really related to what the plant manager told us related to what is success for these learners. What will they be deemed successful when they complete the IET? He listed what they call lockout tagout certification, which is how to protect equipment from turning on when you're cleaning and working on it. Detecting workpiece defects and looking for problems in the line that might cause contamination in the food. Measuring dimensions to determine accuracy. Interpreting daily production schedules, pay increases for individuals that learn these skills. This is a group of Burmese workers. They're learning contextualized English, but if you look at these examples of types of demonstrated performance, then you can see, wow, there's a lot of literacy going on in there. There's a lot of measurement and math going on there, numeracy skills. So any one of these things or a collection of them are something that could be documented on a report such as this. This is just an example. And that would be deemed something the employer says, yep, if these individuals make these skills, that's success. And that's your documented measurable skills gain. So we're really moving way outside the realm of what we're used to with post-testing and those types of things. Here's another example from Tyson. And these, I list these Tyson ones because that's where I work and I know them well, but these are transferable to many businesses. This is a more of a workplace literacy program where the individuals are learning digital literacy. I saw a question earlier about digital literacy and things like the North Star or Voxy Engine exams for digital literacy. That's what the business wants. They want individuals to be able to use computers to do their HR work and to do work in the plant. There could be included in here the Tyson safety exam as a measurable skill gain. And then there are also great exams for contextualized ESL. CASAS makes one called the Workforce Learning System Speaking Test. It's not a pre-post test approved for the NRS, but it could be used for this MSG because it's contextualized, very appropriate for the class. And so here, any one of these types of measures could be included. You only need one a year for your MSG performance for a learner. And here you've got 3 options during that period of participation.
Anson, let me just have you back up to that slide. I think we've had a number of people talking about that. And as you said, you only need one measurable skill gain per year or per period of participation. So what some of these images, these visuals are illustrating are multiple ways to, but obviously for a participant, you would be documenting and recording one of these for the purposes of NRS. It's more about that you've designed your program knowing that you can have multiple ways to get that bite at the apple, right?
Yeah, and a participant may have, get one and not the other, but they've gotten one, and that's what you need for your annual measures. So a great example there, the type 4 I find very exciting, and hope to see lots of expansion there. Let's look at the skills progression. This is the last of the ones we'll talk about today, the type 5 skills progression. And this takes us back into more objective testing and exams. So type 4, very wide open, much different in terms of different options. Type 5 got a lot more specificity in what's available there. So this is successful passage of an exam that's required for a particular occupation or progress in attaining technical or occupational skills as evidenced by trade-related benchmarks or knowledge-based exams. So again, this is much more objective stuff related to exams, and you'll see that in our examples from real practice. It's required for an occupation, particular occupation. So this is something that the occupation requires you to have this test and document that you've passed this exam or test. You've got some options there. Look for that language in the descriptors or as an option. And definitely, again, work-related progress. I think the documentation piece of this is important as evidenced by signals. How are you going to document it? And then the documentation are some sort of standards, levels, or benchmarks or targets that would be focused, be really what these tests or exams would measure. This one gets a lot more clear when we look at some examples. Such as knowledge-based exams, which means it's just one example. The one thing I believe, this is coming from Anson Green, this is a state level decision, but I don't think this measure is talking about college exams and college semester completion exams, because it would have said something about passing an exam at a college or passing some sort of academic exam in the descriptor. There is a measurable skills gain, type 3. That is the one that's report cards and transcripts. And that's where something like your exams at college would count into. So these are more performance-based, competency-based exams that are more familiar to businesses and certification systems. There's no mention of grades in this measure or anywhere in this. And so I think it steers clear away from academic performance. If we look in the guidance some things I want to point out. The documentation for this gain may include passage of a component. So this is again language from the joint guidance, but again, it's not limited to, just some examples, and then you've got some commas, or this, or this, or this. So the departments are clearly saying, we're going to give you a bunch of ideas here. It's not the only ones. These are some options. So again, it's going to be really difficult for anyone to say, here's the finite list of examples of what you can use for this measurable skills gain. States can provide clear guidance on what would count, but I think coming up with a compendium list will be more difficult because the federal guidance doesn't give you a compendium list. It gives you these options with these optional language. And they give you these examples here: apprenticeship exams, employer required tests, etc. So real important that you look at the language very closely and see that you've got a lot of good options here moving forward. And then they have to be options that lead to learning that obtains a credential. So again, it's progress, skills progression towards a credential. So as you know, many types of post-secondary credentials, recognized post-secondary credentials, have different subtests. And that's what we're talking about, is passing these subtests. So let's look at some examples here. This will really get things clear when you see some real life examples. This is a program we're running out of Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Great team out there in our Upward Pathways program. This is a very common certification that you see in IET programs across the country, the Manufacturing Skill Standards Council Certified Production Technician exam. If you know that exam, it's got 4 subtests. And you have to pass all 4 subtests to earn that post-secondary credential. But each one and any one of those subtests would count during a period of participation as your measurable skills gain. So for the individual to complete and get their credential, yes, they need 4. To get an MSG, just one of the 4 during that program year will net you that performance gain. Another example here in the construction trades, very popular programs out there as IETs. This, again, another popular recognized post-secondary credential, which is the National Center for Construction Education and Research, or NCER core curriculum as an outcome credential, but the measurable skills gains are very common. And here you've got a program of study and a period of participation that cross a program year. So in this example, students would be given the OSHA safety exam, the OSHA 10-hour, as a short-term certificate there, maybe just after, 12, 15, 20 hours of instruction. So they could start in June and not have to worry about getting that post-test. They could earn this credential early, and then get some other certifications and tests done throughout the rest of the period of participation that spans the program year. So in year 2, they could get that forklift certification, or maybe take an ESL test or a math test from CASAS or other vendors that make these customized, contextualized tests. So another example, and when you start to look at this, you say, well, man, there's probably 12 different examples like this that would have different types of certifications plugged in, depending on the design of the program. So a lot of flexibility there, but giving you some ideas to start seeding your thinking. And the thing I wanted to point out with this example is this really gets us out of this rut of being worried about starting class in May or April or June because we won't get a post-test gain. You're freed up from that with these programs now, because if you're in a workplace literacy program or IET, you can span that program year, get some early gain that might not take 60 hours or 80 hours or something to earn early on in your program of study. And then here's one that combines the two. This is a program, there's a lot of programs like this out there. I spoke to some folks in Waterloo, Iowa the other day. They're doing something very similar to this. Nurse Aid, very common IET. It's one that has a kind of a written exam, and then it has a performance exam, a clinical type of exam, hands-on. And to get that CNA exam or that nurse aid exam in your state, you typically have to pass both of those components. So that's 2 areas. And then there's a third one added here for a contextualized ESL test. But there's 3 options there, again, spanning a program year for measurable skills gains. And so some students, if you've done CNA, maybe they pass the performance exam, but they can't pass that written test. Well, you don't have to lose hope that all is lost on your MSG performance, because they can use one of those 2 or another test, like in this example, the ESL test given, to capture that performance. And then your post-secondary credential, of course, is the CNA or nurse aid exam. So a lot of examples there, very exciting. I want to kind of end here and look at some questions here, but some next steps for everybody. This has been a lot, I understand. That's why it's recorded. And we will be sending this out, but Judy and I, our intention was really to get you as much as we could, tie it to the guidance, and give you something to review and have discussions with at your local areas. But high level next steps, state leaders and other leaders, like working on your policy. And I talk to state directors all the time, because we're really wanting to get these promulgated in the states where Tyson does business. But developing those policies and getting their modified data systems, the customized state-based systems, as well as LACES and CASAS. And then I think the big news is professional development and training and training and training. I started doing training on these measures back in 2015 in Texas, and it took every bit of several years to really get a state like Texas on board with these. So training is something that needs to be developed. That's something folks like Judy and I love to do also. There's experts out there But these are complicated. Yes, you saw the examples. They're not easy to just, it's not getting a test and buying it and implementing it. There's a lot of critical thinking that has to happen. For teachers and local programs, design your programs with the end outcomes in mind. What is the sequence of learning, and what are the different ways that you might manifest that? And can you make it aligned to some of these measurable skill gains types? Talking to employers about what is a outcome that you're looking for in an employer-based program. Don't go into that meeting with the employer and saying, well, we're going to post-test them on a tape test, because the employer probably doesn't care much about that. They want to know performance, some sort of work-based performance. That's great. Document it. You can have a way to get measurable skill gains in that way. And then for our IETs, it's about taking all those gains that we are already earning in IET and career and tech programs and using them for actual performance that will count towards our state measures. And then document. Just get that documentation down. Extremely important. That's the end of our formal slides. Judy, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, as you move to I think there are 4 open questions. I tried to answer the questions I could along the way. And I
Great.
apologize that I'm going to have to hop off, but I wanted
Yep.
to say one thing about a question that came up, and that was about co-enrollment. And I started this by saying the reason why I have been talking about MSG 4 and 5 for many years, and I'm so excited about this, is because I really do think it now allows co-enrollment and partnership with our Title I, Title IV partners in a much more robust way. And someone asked the question, so I designed this program, we have co-enrollment, someone gets one of these MSGs, who counts it? And the guidance, there is guidance, it's very clear, both systems count it, right? You don't parse out who paid for what and who gets to document that. It's not double dipping to be co-enrolled between Title I adult or Title I youth and Title II adult education, and both document when people hit those measurable skill gains as well as the exit outcomes.
Absolutely. I'm looking at the questions here. Great questions. Y'all are thinking out there. Nicole's question on this TEAS prep pre-nursing program. I think for sure you've got an immeasurable skills gain in there if you're prepping for that. We see a lot of that in these types of programs, and definitely could make that work. I don't know enough about all of the details to identify which one specifically that would be. But clearly I see one in there. Kelly Meeks, again, good to hear from you. Absolutely, on the CNA, separating the reporting on the exams, your written exam that you have for nurse aid, and then that performance exam. They're more than pass fail, but they are pass fail in some ways, but they have skills. But yes, pass fail could count. If you read those measure types, it's progress towards meeting these specific elements. Passing is progress. And I think we're getting at time here. I want to leave enough time because we got to leave you with a quick survey. Other questions might come in. You guys have my email address. I know that's kind of a crazy thing to say with 382 people on, but I'm all about getting your answers answered. So my email is right there, ansongreen@tyson.com. I'll share with Judy if there are things I get stuck on, but I want to build capacity in the United States for this work across our field. It's great stuff, and we really appreciate your engagement on this. So please, you've got the poll out there, fill that out, and come on this big adventure with us. If you're a state director and you want to have a sidebar with me, learn more, please don't hesitate. And we will be getting the PowerPoint slides out. Everybody's free to use whatever you want for your own professional development training. Contact me if you're interested in finding out where trainers are, if you want to bring folks in. I do that work too. And we really want to build capacity this year. It's a great opportunity for us to work better with our employers. And by golly, to capture what we've been really striving to capture in IET, which are these more holistic measures out there that bring such great reward, because that's what the students really are focused on, are those employment focused measures. Getting them to sit down and take a post test after the end of an IET is probably next to impossible sometimes. So now we can actually get credit for that great work. So I appreciate your work in adult education and appreciate your attention to this wonderful webinar. Judy, thanks so much for your expertise. And we look forward to hearing your questions and seeing how things progress as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today, and everyone have a great day.